Previously on the Costcappen scandal, Red Bull were sweating like Paul di Resta in a playground because of a rumour they had broken the cost cap by £10 million. No, that's a lot of money! A crime for which they would be excluded from the championship. Team LH intensified. But then another report came out and suggested it was only £1 million and Red Bull would escape without severe punishment, because apparently £1 million is still a minor offence.
No, it was a shooting weekend.
A shooting weekend.
Just a straightforward shooting weekend.
So at this point, everything was just speculation. So obviously, the mainstream media talked about it non-stop. Toto Wolff ran his big fat dirty mouth. Christian Horner pretended not to be nervous. And F1 Twitter had a full-blown aneurysm. Then, because things were getting so out of control, the FIA released a statement telling everybody to shut the f*** up. And look at how many words it took them to say, shut the f*** up.
The FIA notes significant and unsubstantiated speculation and conjecture in relation to this matter, and reiterates that the assessment is ongoing and due process will be followed without consideration to any external discussion, otherwise known as
shut the f*** up. So obviously everybody ignored that statement and carried on screaming at each other for the next 5 days. Then it was Wednesday, and this is when the FIA said they were going to release the official documents. However, because we were all having so much fun speculating. Or is it speculationing?
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't.
I know it's not speculationing, but that sounded right, so I'm going to roll with it. Because we were all having so much fun speculationing, the FIA decided to make us wait 5 more days until Monday after the Japanese Grand Prix. So Formula One arrived in Japan, where Nicholas Latifi got lost and blamed it on the car. The FIA tried to kill Pierre Gasly and blamed it on Pierre Gasly. And Max Verstappen is now a 2-time world champion. Wrong. He's a no-time world champion, because Abu Dhabi was a hate crime and Japan was just weird, and I didn't like it. So he didn't win the world championship when he crossed the line, but then Charles Leclerc remembered he was Charles Leclerc and f***ed it into the final chicane. Then he received a 5-second penalty for being a dum-dum, but Max Verstappen still wasn't the world champion because the FIA decided to give everybody half points. But then, the FIA decided to give everybody full points and Max Verstappen wins the world championship in the interview after the race. In fact, it was Johnny Herbert who told him. But because everything Johnny Herbert says is either a lie or stupid, he still wasn't sure. Until in the driver's room, somebody told him that he definitely was, and then they made him sit in this big, weird, awkward chair. And while all of this was going on, nobody even noticed that Nicholas Latifi scored points. Yeah. It was weird. But then it was Monday and the FIA have finally released the documents and it is official. Red Bull have broken the cost cap. No way. Oh, yes way. And you know what that means? Christian Horner is a liar and Toto Wolff will now have an erection for the rest of the season. So what do the documents actually say? Well, according to the FIA, the team's catering budget accounts for almost all of the breach. Daily lunches for the team's 1,000 plus staff members at the company's Milton Keynes headquarters, blah, blah, blah. The report found that costs associated with absent staff also contributed to the breach. So basically, they got a bit carried away at din-dins and they had the nerve to pay their staff sick leave. Throw them in jail. Right now. So now that we know that Red Bull have been spending hella stacks, what is going to happen? Well, on this list of potential punishments, they could have points taken away, they could be suspended from a stage of the competition, limitations on aero testing, or a reduction of the cost cap. That's it. Nobody's going to get crucified or burned at the stake. Lame. Although, Bernie Ecclestone, remember him? He was the human scrotum that used to run F1. When he was asked, do you think Red Bull will be stripped of championship points in 2021? He said, things will get worse. And then the Hamilton shaggers took that and used it as ammunition for their cause. Is this who you want to be quoting? Are you going to tell them, or shall I? Bernie Ecclestone is what's known as a Vladimir Putin sympathizer. He said, and I quote, Vladimir is a first-class person and that he would take a bullet for him. And little Bernie is currently on trial for fraud. £400 million worth. That's 400 times what Red Bull overspent on mozzarella sticks. But I guess if his opinion fits in with your agenda, it doesn't really matter what sort of person he is. Like, I imagine if Jeffrey Dahmer said Max Verstappen is a human error champion, you can guarantee that would have ended up on Hamilton Insights. Fucking idiots. It's gone nippy again. It has gone nippy. I swear down on my nan's grave. So that is the current state of the Costcappen scandal. Red Bull have been found guilty, Christian Horner is a fraud, and Toto Wolff is now fully dilated. But let's get back to the Japanese Grand Prix, which was an absolute slag of a race. First of all, it was lights out at 6 o'clock in the morning. The nerve. Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc go side by side into the first corner. Sebastian Vettel shags it into the gravel. Zhou Guanyu shags it around at the hairpin. Pierre Gasly shags it into an advertising banner. Alex Albon shags it onto the grass. And Carlos Sainz shags it into the barriers. All of this happened within the first 60 seconds of the race. Then it was red flagged for the next 2 hours.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine.
So we got up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and I am going to keep complaining about that. All you Australians can piss off. We got up at 6 a.m. to watch half a lap of racing and then 2 hours of Paul di Resta sympathising with a tractor. Oh yes. Let's talk about the tractor incident. So, during the red flag, while we were all sat waiting for the race to restart, a video emerged on Twitter. Not Sky Sports F1, it took them about an hour to pick up on this, but on Twitter, this video was going around. On-board footage from Pierre Gasly's car showing him drive past a tractor in a very dangerous position. Now, the first thing I want to point out is this is not a tractor. This is a tractor, you cosmopolitan bastards. I mean, I'd like to see you try and hook up a cultivator to the back of that. Secondly, this vehicle, which is what they use to recover stranded Formula 1 cars, has been specifically designed to kill Formula 1 drivers. I mean, look at the shape of its arse. That gap right there is the perfect size and angle to completely decapitate an F1 driver. And we've seen it happen. In 2014, at Suzuka, in the pissing down rain, Adrian Sutil aquaplaned into the barriers, leaving his car stranded in a dangerous position. And even though there were marshals and a recovery vehicle right in the line of fire, there was no red flag, there wasn't even a safety car, the race continued with double-waved yellow flags. That's insane. And then just 1 lap later, Jules Bianchi aquaplaned and smashed into the back of the recovery vehicle. The force of the impact completely destroyed the top half of Bianchi's car, leaving him with severe brain damage and eventually leading to his death. In the FIA report that came out after the crash, they basically admitted that it's impossible to make a crash with this type of vehicle survivable. And they have since admitted that even the halo would not have saved Jules Bianchi's life. So this vehicle is a death machine. It should never be allowed on track with the F1 cars in the pissing down rain without a red flag. So, in 2022, when Carlos Sainz aquaplaned into the barrier, leaving his car stranded in a dangerous position, with marshals on track and a recovery vehicle right in the line of fire, what was the FIA's response? They put out the safety car, which would have been just fine, except for all of the reasons I'm about to explain. First of all, Pierre Gasly was out of position. He had to come into the pit lane to get that advertising banner taken off the front of his car. So when he came out of the pits, he drove like a chav, trying to catch up to the back of the safety car train. And when he got to the part of the track where the death machine was, that's when the FIA decided to red flag the race. So you can blame both sides for this. Pierre Gasly for driving like a chav, and the FIA for not red flagging it before they put the death machine on the circuit. But I found another angle. Swear down, I mean, I'm great. Is that hair? This is a video taken by a fan in the grandstands opposite where it happened, and this is some damning evidence. So, here we can see the Ferrari stranded at the side of the track. A few seconds later, we see Carlos Sainz get out of the car, and then he runs across the track to the other side, because that's where the party is. Then we see these 2 Japanese marshals run towards the Ferrari, one with a fire extinguisher, and the other with a can-do attitude. And at this point, even though there are now 2 people on the track, in a very dangerous position, no red flag. All of the cars were following the safety car and were fast approaching this spot. Then enter the killing machine, which came out of this gap right here and starts driving up the hill towards the Ferrari. Now, as it approaches the Ferrari, with its gigantic F1 driver killing arse, just as it gets to the scene of the crash, wait for it, the safety car train arrives. That's Verstappen, Leclerc, Perez, Ocon, Hamilton, and this is where I wanted to make a point, because Paul di Resta and Johnny Herbert, those two beanbags, when they were stood around the Skypad debating this, Simon Lazenby said, maybe an earlier red flag. Perfectly reasonable suggestion. And listen to what Paul and Johnny had to say.
Or an earlier red flag.
Well, I think we're the victim of trying to get a race underway because of what happened last year.
So we do a red flag every time there's a crash. It goes on, yeah.
I think we're the victim of trying to get a race underway because of what happened last year. He's talking about Spa last year, which is a completely different situation. And then Johnny's point about throwing a red flag every time there's an accident. No, Johnny, that's not what we're saying. It's how about we throw a red flag every time there's a human cultivator on the circuit in the pissing down rain. £500 a year we pay for these insights. And the point is, any one of these cars, even at safety car speeds, could have aquaplaned or had a mechanical problem and ploughed into the back of the death machine. And or the two Japanese marshals that were stood right there. And then there's the advertising banner that got stuck on the front of Pierre Gasly's car. If that didn't happen, he wouldn't have been out of position, and so he wouldn't have been driving like a chav, trying to catch back up to the safety car train. So where did the advertising banner come from? Well, that's where this gets juicy. Real juicy. Because through investigative journalism, I have discovered who is really at fault for this whole thing. If we go back to the very beginning of that video, just after the crash happened, there's the Ferrari sliding and come to a stop, and just there, in the middle of the track, that is the advertising banner. Then we see George Russell drive around it, there's Daniel Ricciardo, that's Yuki Tsunoda driving around it, then a few cars drive straight over the top of it, and then wait this. That is Nicholas Latifi, and right behind him is Pierre Gasly. And when Nicholas Latifi drives over it, he flicks it up just enough, and that's what lodged it on the front of Pierre Gasly's car. So this whole thing is Nicholas Latifi's fault. Throw him in jail! Right now! Throw him in jail! Thankfully, everything worked out just fine. Nobody was killed by the death machine, and after 2 hours of debating whether tractors have feelings, the race restarted and we got 39 minutes of decent action. Now, about Max Verstappen's World Championship. It seems like he can't win a World Championship without the entire world imploding. I mean, Abu Dhabi was the FIA having a stroke in a very high-pressure situation, and now this year with Red Bull taking the piss with the catering expenses, neither of which are his fault, and yet the anger and the outrage towards Verstappen is adorable. There's this idea that he's not a real world champion because those situations tainted the championships. That's what you call a drive to survive perspective. So let me explain something to the children. Michael Schumacher won his first world championship by turning in on Damon Hill, deliberately taking both of them out of the race, and then tried the same thing the next year on Jacques Villeneuve, but this time took himself out of the race. Something he was disqualified from the championship for. Lewis Hamilton won his first world championship the year after McLaren was disqualified and fined $100 million for spying on Ferrari. The biggest scandal in F1 history. Ayrton Senna won his second world championship by yeeting Alain Prost out of the race at the first corner. All of those things are infinitely worse than what happened over the last 2 years with Red Bull and Verstappen, and yet nobody questions the validity of their world championships. Why? Because when those things happened, Drive to Survive wasn't a thing. F1 Twitter didn't exist. Lewis Hamilton was bald. Michael Massey was just a baby. The Queen was still alive. McDonald's was still serving the McRib. The Prodigy were in the charts. You could buy a pick and mix from Woolworths. You could go ice skating without anybody calling you a puff. Madonna was still fuckable, and so was your mom. My point is... What was my point? Max Verstappen is a 2-time world champion. Christian Horner is a fraud. The FIA are out of their minds. I miss the McRib. Nicholas Latifi should be thrown in jail. And there is no such thing as a shooting weekend. Open your eyes and goodbye.
Straightforward shooting weekend.
Yeah.